Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are talking about a poet who completely ripped up the old rulebook and, you could say, taught poetry how to feel again. His name was William Wordsworth. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we need to set the stage and see what he was up against. Then, we'll dive into his game-changing manifesto, explore the very core of his philosophy, and finally, take a look at the huge impact he still has today. All right. First up, let's get a picture of the world Wordsworth walked into. This was the era of something called classicism, a style of poetry that had a very specific and, let's be honest, pretty rigid and stuffy set of rules. And the contrast here is just wow. 18th century poetry, which was dominated by classicism, was all about reason, order, and what they called objective intellect. It was very formal, very brainy. Wordsworth and the Romantics, they just flipped the entire script. They championed imagination, freedom, and raw, messy, subjective emotion. So you've got this tension brewing between the old guard and the new ideas. And that set the stage for one of the most important documents in all of English literature, a piece of writing that would basically become the official manifesto for a whole new kind of art. So in 1802, when Wordsworth published his collection of poems called Lyrical Ballads, he stuck a preface in the front. But this was no simple hello and welcome to my book. Oh no, this was a declaration of war on the old way of thinking. It was a blueprint for a brand new, totally revolutionary vision of what poetry could and should be. And right at the heart of it all is this one famous sentence. This is Wordsworth's new recipe for poetry, and it has two absolutely key ingredients. First, you need that spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. But, and this is the crucial part, that feeling is then revisited later, in a moment of calm, quiet reflection. Okay, so that's the theory, but how does this actually work? Let's get practical and break down exactly how, according to Wordsworth, a powerful feeling actually turns into a poem. And here it is. His philosophy turned into a clear four-step process. See, it's not just about having some big emotional moment. That's just step one. The real magic, the poetic spark, happens later. It happens in tranquility, when you calmly look back and remember that feeling. The poem itself isn't the feeling. It's the overflow from the memory of the feeling. And he illustrates this whole idea perfectly in his most famous poem, the one we all know about, The Daffodils. Think about it. He's not writing this poem while he's standing in a field of flowers. No, he's writing it later, sitting alone, when the memory of those flowers flashes upon that inward eye. It's the memory that triggers the joy, and the joy that triggers the poem. Now, why was this so important? Because this was an incredibly radical idea at the time. He was saying that the power of a poem doesn't come from clever wordplay or obscure references that only a few educated people would get. No, he argued its real power comes from universal human emotions: joy, sadness, wonder, things that anyone, anywhere could feel. He was, in effect, democratizing poetry. And that brings us right to his next two revolutionary ideas. Because if poetry is about shared human feeling, well, what does that mean for the poet themselves? And what kind of language should they be using? I love the phrasing here. Notice he deliberately asks, what is a poet, not who is a poet. He wasn't interested in their social status or their fancy education. He wanted to get to the very core, the function, the essence of what makes someone a poet. And his answer was a game changer. For Wordsworth, a poet isn't some kind of godlike genius living on a mountaintop. They are first and foremost a man speaking to men, an ordinary person. But they're an ordinary person with all the dials turned up. They have a sharper sensitivity, more enthusiasm, and just a deeper connection to the human heart. So, if the poet is basically a regular person, Wordsworth argued, then they should talk like one. He called for a total rejection of the artificial, ornate, and frankly, kind of snobby language that had dominated poetry for centuries. I mean, just look at the difference here. It's night and day. Instead of some flowery, over-the-top description of the sun, Wordsworth gives us this simple, powerful, profound image of a child grieving. He stripped away all the fancy decorations to get to something more direct, more raw, and way more emotionally true. So let's zoom out. After changing the power source of poetry to emotion, redefining the poet, and totally overhauling the language of art, what was the long-term impact? What did this revolution actually achieve? You can really boil it down to these three things.
Wordsworth gave poetry a new engine, swapping out cold intellect for passionate emotion. He gave it a new hero, celebrating the common person instead of the elite. And he gave it a whole new voice, using everyday speech instead of artificial language. He didn't just tweak the rules, he changed the entire game.
And his ideas were so much bigger than just poetry. They helped fuel a massive cultural shift we now call the Romantic movement. This whole way of thinking placed the individual's personal, subjective, emotional experience right at the center of everything. Art, life, you name it. Our feelings and our connection to the natural world became the things that mattered most. So what's the big takeaway from all this? I think it's this. Wordsworth's revolution is a powerful validation of your own ordinary experience. He's making the argument that your feelings, the way you talk, and the way you see the world aren't just valid. They are profound, and they are absolutely worthy of being turned into art. And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. Wordsworth tore down the wall separating elite art from real everyday life more than 200 years ago. But when you look around today, at everything from hip-hop lyrics to reality TV to modern art, you have to ask, isn't that a battle that artists are still fighting?